Hello, good evening. My name is Carolin. Thank you very much, Shama, for the introduction. And to Nada, of course, to Shama, and to Saloni, and Isakal Arts Foundation for this invitation. And of course, thank you very much, Pallavi, for this invitation. Pallavi and I have been in conversation quite intensively since her residency at the Gropiusbau, which then led to the already mentioned exhibition at the Gropiusbau in, I think, it ran over a year. So it was basically an exhibition over two parts, some sort of, it stretched over time. And I have been working there in the institution while Pallavi was there and had the studio inside the institution. So we really shared this space together. And this is not our first public conversation. We co-taught a seminar at the university in Frankfurt, and then we had this conversation at the Gropiusbau. And the film, The Blind Rabbit, is some sort of always coming up again in our conversations. And I just watched it again this morning. I have seen it many times and in different occasions and circumstances. And I guess this is the case with complex work like this, that you always see something really new and something, not that you didn't see it, but you always look at it with different eyes and different perspectives, because I really didn't want to ask Pallavi the same question, so it's also a little bit interesting for her. And so the idea would be that we engage in a conversation. I, ask some questions, and then we will also open this up to the audience for you to have the chance to also ask Pallavi.
Thank you, Carolin. Thank you, Nada, Shama, Saloni, the whole team here, and thank you all for coming and staying. I know it's not an easy work to watch and to spend time with, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to this collective moment of thinking and talking.
So the first question some sort of relates to the notion of the removal or the withdrawal, because the film, of course, accumulates a lot of footage, visual, acoustic, which you juxtapose, and where you bring these different moments in history in relation to one another. But what was really present for me watching the film again is the notion of the reduction, the withdrawal, the cutting the image into half, the putting something into our side, like, for instance, this, it looks almost like a black triangle, but it's really cutting the image into half. This method gives, of course, form to the fragmentation in archive and memory, which is very present also in the narration. But maybe even more importantly, I believe it is a generative process which really makes this a pulsing body, this opening and closing. And also, of course, the narrative relates to this. So the doubling of Indira Gandhi, the cutting in half of the person. So it's the stretching and the limiting. And then the tiger, which is omnipresent, but we can never see it in its whole. So can you maybe speak about this notion of accumulation and withdrawal? This technique of opening and closing, and how this some sort of determines how you sense the connections between these different events, and also how you can access what is not visible to our eyes.
Yeah, I think one thing to start by saying, which is I think the most sort of foundational thing about this film, is that it is a pandemic film. It was made at a time when we were going through a very hard lockdown, and going out to film anything was just not an option. So, so the process of actually making this film started with me pulling a long black slug on the edit. And then beginning to kind of incise with as much precision as I could this kind of long black slug. And that's how, and of course, as you said, that the ideas or the questions that the film also deals with have to do with erasure, right? And the question of blindness, and when I think of blindness at that time, but also now, as I continue to think of blindness as a concept, when we were all, sort of shut inside our homes in this kind of, as this medical, spiritual catastrophe was unfolding around us, political catastrophe was unfolding around us, the idea of not being able to see, or the frustration or the exasperation of not being able to see, was something that everyone was feeling. But as an artist, I feel like my job was not to make something out of this feeling, right? So you don't make in spite of the blindness, as I always say, you make because of it. So in that sense, this idea of opacity actually becomes quite generative. And when, of course, transposed on certain kinds of historical moments, you're able to sense much more, or a wider kind of, because every moment is undergirded with exchanges, with transmissions, with traces, with erasures, and they have another story to tell you. And I think in that sense, this was a very interesting challenge for me, that when your capacity to hold a camera and go outside and record an image to kind of fit some kind of thought structure that you have as a filmmaker, when that is not possible, when you have to go foraging for images, what are the images that then you bring into the film? Which are the ones that you leave out? And how does that speak to the history of power? Because power, like I said, in the story of power, this is also exactly what is done. Some images are doubled, some are cut into half, some are entirely erased, some are replicated. And in the thing of the archive again, which is something that I've now said many times about this film, is that what was again interesting for me was false records of certain events were generated, and then these false records were extinguished or erased. So actually, as a filmmaker, I was dealing with this kind of double erasure, you know. And what does this double erasure actually mean? How do these two kinds of negatives fold upon one another? And how does one again create something interesting or provocative without necessarily trying to plug the negative by inserting a positive, by inserting the actual shape of an event or an actual fact inside of it? Because we don't know, there's too much leakage, the edges have frayed a lot, and because of this, a lot of porosity, a lot of other things have started to sprout or grow. And in this kind of thick growth where it's difficult to see, how are we then going to sense our modes of navigation? So yeah, I mean, to give you an example from the film, so of course there are these children who were abducted and then they forgot their homes. But the parallel thing that was also happening during the emergency was that homes were being destroyed. Buildings were being demolished, homes were being demolished. So this home exists in the mind of a child, and now this child has forgotten this home, but parallelly this home has also been destroyed in the actual real world. So what do you do with this swirl? What do you do with these multiple erasures that are actually just spinning on their own edges? And I think for me, that was what provoked this film. That was why I felt I needed to think of, and hold together all of these different erasures and try to make some kind of durational experience out of them.
I find it interesting that, of course, I understand why this notion of blindness some sort of triggered making this film, but what I believe is also evident, what the film makes evident, is that blindness is not necessarily the consequence of something being invisible. So, I mean, for instance, the stench stays longer than the witness. So there is a presence of something which is invisible to our eyes.
Of course.
Or the communal violence is not shown. We hear it and we read or we listen to the woman, the witness, basically. Can you speak about this connection between the invisible as a body? I mean, the title of this program is "Can the Invisible Disappear?" So the invisible has a body. So it is not necessarily related to not being able to see.
No, I think just as things that we see, things that we don't see have their own will and their own cadence and their own destiny. And in that, sometimes they will appear as a haunting. It appears as a haunting. Sometimes it appears as an actual hard encounter. Sometimes it appears as a memory, right? So the invisible, whatever is the invisible, and this can the invisible disappear is actually, I've borrowed it from a very mainstream Hindi film, a Bollywood film called Talash, where a ghost of a woman is talking to a man who does not yet know that he's talking to the ghost of a woman. And then they're basically chatting about life, and then he says something about, do you often, are you able to sense things that are not around you? And then she says, because he's been thinking about ghosts, but he doesn't know that he's actually hanging out with one. And then she says to him in Hindi, जो है ही नहीं वो गायब कैसे हो सकते हैं? Which basically means, can those who don't exist, how can they disappear? And to me, this is such a fecund and telling. It's kind of this, fertile ground in which many things can be sown. And for me, invisibility is not. I mean, it can be both a superpower and the other side of it, which is blindness, can be sensed as a loss of capacity. So here you hold together this immense amplification of possibility and a sharp cutting down of capacity together, in the same equation. So for me, they're very connected. It's doubling and halving,
Yeah, and it's opacity. Coming back to this example with the children, first of all, there's no record of their disappearance. And then there's this lack of memory because they are very young. And then there's also the disappearance of the real location. So what you call the double erasure. What is the relationship between the record, the document, and the bodily location in the world? So I'm thinking also about losing sight, and losing sight. And now with my accent, you don't hear that there's a difference. But I mean the sight with GH and the sight with
No, it's
T.
nothing to do with the accent.
So you say also sight.
Yes.
But you remember this, no? Losing sight and losing sight. So losing the capacity to see and then losing the location in the place.
Yes. Yeah, I think the document at best is a shadow of our intentions, no? Intentions around bodies, intentions around places. The document is a arrangement of intentions. And just as the body moves, the intentions around it shift, and sometimes the intentions try to fortify the body. Sometimes they try to, injure the body. Sometimes they try to incarcerate the body. And in the best situations, they try and, create a playful zone for bodies to move in. So there is no essential document. There is no essential body. It is a very interesting coded dance, sometimes very macabre and brutal, and sometimes extremely exhilarating and wonderful.
And I mean, we speak about the invisible, but maybe we should also speak about silence or sound, because it's there. I mean, I already mentioned that, you know, we only hear the violence and the description of the violence in this one occasion, and then in the attack in the at the university, in the library, we only see the image, but we don't have the sound. And then also the camera is destroyed. Can you speak about sound and silence, and also your interest in sound as something that needs the
the world
body in order to be heard?
No, of course. I mean, just the physical properties of sound are more worldly than light. Light can travel in vacuum, sound cannot. So it clings to objects, it clings to people, it clings to things. And I sense it very much as a... I mean, for me, these are not really... there's no sort of... I mean, it's very banal to say that there's no hierarchy between sound and image, but for me, they are not in a kind of a explicatory relationship to each other. So for me, when an image tears, or when, and in this case, for example, when the camera is attacked, it's a very interesting moment, because the camera becomes one with the body of the students. So there's the person is attacking the bodies of the students and thinks it fit to also attack the camera, and he's not done with it till it's completely... And the bizarre thing is that this injured camera is the camera which caught most of this, you know, thing. So there is this kind of redistribution, I would say, of threat, of possibility, of care, that sound is sometimes able to do for the image, and at other times the image is able to do for the sound. So I feel like they're in a very interesting thing where they reassign what can be put in the corner of an image or for sound.
Yeah, and maybe this is also your way to access the imagination, because when you detach the sound from the image, or the other way around, it travels into both directions, some sort of, then you can access something which is beyond the visible or the acoustic.
Absolutely, absolutely. The thing that, you know, you keep chasing like a mad person when you're making a film. That thing when you know something's done. There's no explanation, but it is that zone in which the image and sound have coalesced, that, yeah, or diverged.
Maybe we, I mean, it's all related some sort of, but maybe we speak about your interest in the burial sites here, because this also relates to your interest in the presence of something which is absent.
Yes. Yes.
Or the burial site, in the film that I know well, which you produced at the Gruppesbau Hall of Roofs, it's about the burial site, the cemetery, as a place of regeneration. Yes. And here you visit burial sites, and you are interested in burial sites and mourning rituals here in Dubai. I think it could be interesting if you speak about your interest, and maybe also the places or the hosts that you already encountered here.
Yeah, I mean, of course I could speak about it, but that would be a little bit boring for I think people here, because there's nothing yet to see there. But I can tell you a story, which is the story of a rooster. So basically, I don't go alone to the graveyard. I have companions, two companions, Saloni and Shama, and it's this group of us that lands up at all kinds of strange places here. So when we went a few days ago to the Sonapur cemetery in Jabal Ali, which sits, of course, as some of you may know it, it sits in the heart of this very, hard industrial kind of landscape. And as the gates opened, we entered this amazing, enchanting place with lots of plants and beauty and, this very cheerful pyre keeper. And also along with him, we saw walking in this place a rooster who was just walking by himself. And then Saloni very interestingly asked the question to this pyre keeper about the rooster and asked him how he got here. How did the rooster come? He says, yeah, he came here when he was a baby. He was a small chick when he arrived. And it's now been 4 years. So we asked him how, but why did he come to you? So then we heard a story of this one girl who must have come to Dubai 4 or 5 years ago. She was young, possibly young, but definitely unmarried, and ended up committing suicide. And then she needed to be cremated, of course. But in the community, in the traditions of the community that she belonged to, which was, from the south of India, she couldn't have been cremated had she not been married. Hence, this little rooster was brought, and a marriage was performed in the cemetery between this corpse and this rooster. And so he was this widowed husband of the corpse of this woman who now is living, I would like to report, a very fulfilled, happy life in the Sonapur cemetery. So, yeah, this is my research interest currently. Yeah. And intimacies. Or interrupted intimacies.
Yeah, and that death is not the end.
No, that is never the end. That is not the end. Yes. But this is also not what I say. This is what Shamim, the gravekeeper, who is the protagonist of my recently produced film that Caro mentioned, How Love Moves, he is a philosopher of death and by extension life, and he always says that death is not the end. And I think increasingly I'm coming to understand that he's right. Yeah.
Is this a good moment to open up to you?
Passing out the mic, so just raise your hand. I'll give you guys a minute to think. Thank you. I just wanted to say it's interesting to see this film because I saw it obviously on my computer screen and it changed a lot seeing it projected. And one of the things that really struck me was how you use light and the kind of treatment of light and darkness as a metaphor throughout the work. And I was interested in that as obviously the subtitling Against the Black is also a kind of light and darkness. But there were these particular images of electric light and night, which I thought were an interesting choice. So maybe if you could speak a bit about that, and then also the magician with the... I just thought that was a really interesting... I was curious about the origins of that clip.
Yes. No, I mean, it's the OG, it's PC Sarkar and him in his full element. And he was really a magician par excellence. And also so theatrical, no? So this whole, the theatrics of it. No, but I think the thing about, of course, the light, the most obvious thing, of course, about the light and illumination and darkness and erasure. But then I was also thinking, like, what is an image? Like, so basically there are only a couple of images that I could film from the balcony of my house. The pigeons, the distorted pigeons, the locusts. There was a big locust attack in the middle of the pandemic that had also happened in Delhi while all of this was going on. But then I was also thinking of images which are not animate, which are not, so for me, all of these like strange light poles, which are the only things that you actually sometimes end up seeing in a city if you're at a certain height, For me, they were also kind of speaking to infrastructure and just nuts and bolts of also the film internally, but also the city and this place. So yeah, something between being functional and dysfunctional and technological and organic and um, helping vision and disrupting it. So I think there was that I was thinking about a lot.
Hi. I just wanted to ask about like what inspired the beginning of the film, like why you started it. Was it kind of to explore the power and the erasure, or did you start with the story of the boys being abducted and stuff like that and kind of expand on that, just like how you started the film, basically?
You mean the snow, the walk in the snow?
I think just more like like how did the idea of it start for you, and then how did it grow?
Of the film.
Yeah.
So, all of these things that you see, the students being attacked, etc., the thing that you hear, I went to these universities. I studied, these are my peers, my colleagues. So when we were stuck indoors and these images, they were coming into our phones and, on TV screens, of course, completely contextualized differently, right? Like, look at these students who are disrupting the peace of the country. Look at these students who are. So, of course, the first impulse was of rage, of anger, of helplessness, of deep sadness. But then you, like I always say, no, you have to make something out of that. So the initial idea started with that, but then the fact that when you start to think about power, you realize that it doesn't localize itself to one event or to one regime. And then when you have to draw that arc, it takes you to many different places, to many different moments in which this had also happened. This also happens, or this had also happened. And yeah, so it's kind of trying to hold the memory of everything that has been actively culled from memory. And even as we were going through that moment, we knew that this is going to get, you know, they will make it disappear. You know, just as the regimes past have made things disappear. But everything, every contact leaves a trace, and then what do you do with that trace is your craft.
That was a great film. I missed half of it because the loud sounds were kind of like.
No, it's difficult to watch and
No,
hear. And
yeah, this is the loud sounds, I guess. But the bits that I did get, I wanted to ask you. So I'm not very familiar with the history of the emergency, but I wanted to ask you about the genealogy of impunity, and how you trace that to these things, and also do you trace it into like this process of mourning? Do your projects currently have like do they bleed into each other, like how it's a lot about life and it's a lot about, I don't know, like this, like you mentioned, like a swirl. So I was wondering about that process, the kind of like existential underlies of it, and how you trace that into contemporary India right now. So.
I'll pick on a few things that you said and try to respond, and then we can try to come to a shape of maybe a response proper. There is nothing existential about mourning. Mourning is an act of deep affirmation and resilience and regeneration and the production of a new paradigm. So you produce a new edge when you mourn, a new edge within yourself, within the world. It's an expansion of many, many things. So it's actually very decisive, it has no singular grammar. Every person mourns differently, and the timelines are also wildly different. But to be punctual to mourning, to show up for your own mourning, is a decision. It's a choice. And in some cases, it's a choice that saves us, saves those who have not yet met the moment of mourning. All of us will for different reasons in different ways. So we are saved by the courage of the mourners. They save us. So nothing existential there. But yes, when you think about catastrophe in this kind of super full way, coming at you from everywhere, mourning is a byproduct of that. So yes, I think personally and artistically, I am in mourning, and I'm interested in mourning. And mourning as a possibility uh, to further all of the horizons, that I now have to, I had imagined will appear, but have not appeared, have evaporated halfway, or just are always perhaps going to be imminent. And one hopes happens in my lifetime and the time of my artistic career, etc. But if they don't, you just leave, you till the ground as much as you can for those who will come after us, just as we came after some people. Uh, and then you said something about the genealogy of impunity. I mean, yeah, I think it's very straightforward, no? It's a kind of there's a moment of hubris, in the story of power. This hubris gets challenged. There is a pushback. There is always a reaction. And that's how we keep inventing political thought, political action, but we also expand sensory and extrasensory capacities. So I feel like it's an ongoing thing. I am not a genealogy person. I'm not history with a capital H person anyway. But I'm sure there's something up. When you try to work your way back and things become one big thing, but then they also pulverize and float freely. So.
When you were doing the interviews with the various different people, obviously now these are people at I would say at the ground level, right? I mean, these are not necessarily people in power. They are reflecting their memories of the emergency, doing what they were doing, writing what they were told to write, accordingly. Is that also, or have you seen that reflected in recent history with, with the things that happened at JNU? And with everything that's happened after that as well. I mean, even up to date, quite frankly. Do you see the parallels of the same people doing the same thing 40 years down the line, 50 years down the line?
I mean, I would like to think about power. I think that's more productive. It's not about individuals. It's not about whether the same people are doing that now, who were the people who were doing. I mean, I feel like that's not where the interesting stuff is. If we have to think about the character of power and the perversities that it comes with. And when you do things because you can, is also that, kind of moment where, yeah, I mean, and everyone has a different relationship, right? In the food chain, everyone has a different relationship to the obligations of their place in the food chain. So some people live with guilt, some people think of it as, nothing to be bothered about, and some people think of it as the right thing to have done. So I'm not so interested in the individual psyche. I'm not so interested in that. I'm more interested in what happens when a lot of moving parts come together for a bit and produce a moment. Yeah.
May I ask something? I found Nada's comment on the light very interesting and productive. And then you ask about the beginning of the film, which is also the end, in the snow landscape. And snow, it's really interesting also how you work with nature. Because the snow, it is quiet. And snow makes things quiet, and then it also some sort of hides traces. It produces new ones, but it covers the soil, and it's like an equalizer, like the soil or stone or whatever. Once the snow is there, you don't see the difference between what is on the ground. this I find very interesting, and this also makes the space very bright, but it does not make the space visible. And then there is this moment with the spotlights on the trees. You know, it's as if they are searching for something, but there is nothing else than the trees. So the light, which is supposed to make things visible, does not function here as such.
Absolutely, like light is not revelatory and darkness is not fully opaque.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know.
this is Pallavi Paul sentence. Yeah. But I didn't want to interrupt your questions.
So my question is about a provocation that you kind of introduced at the beginning of the film. Because light and sound are kind of the texture of filmmaking, right? It's the interplay between the two. But I want to come back to this idea of the stench of the image and what happens to it in your mind. I mean, I think the dissonance between light and between sound and image creates like a disconcerting synesthesia almost. But yeah, I was really, like, I'd never thought about the smell of an image in a video. But then I was wondering what happens to that provocation, because it happened at the beginning of the film, and then I don't know if I saw it come back at the end or, yeah, so I just wanted you to reflect on that a little.
The film is the reverse, right? So the structure loosely in my head is you start with something very definitive like a dead body. Then you resurrect. Then it becomes bodies that are alive that are being brutalized. And then the body disappears. Then the child has been disappeared. So there's a kind of a reverse process.
But in some sense, then you're suggesting that like the body has smell, but the disappeared body doesn't.
Because the disappeared body is dislocated. I mean, the disappeared body that I'm talking about is the child that was dislocated, is continuing to live in some facility, God knows where, and is lost to the family. So it's so in that sense, the corpse only appears in the beginning of the film.
Yeah, I guess what I'm asking is, I'm just following this provocation that you have about like death being a generative act.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me then, like, does the ghost have a smell? Like I mean, I almost like the idea that the ghost has a smell. And also the idea of like blindness, like making you much more sensitive to other senses. And of course the most common one, like the one we feel the most in the film, is sound. But I was also thinking about smell. So yeah.
I'm sure ghosts have a smell. I'm sure they do, and I would like to even venture that they smell nice. I mean, I suppose for most of the time. The stench of the image is something that I think about a lot, actually. And I thought about it during the pandemic much, much more. As when you and I were having our chat, we were talking about the body bags, The fact of zipping up human remains in this thing and burying them, and possibly bodies have not yet decomposed. So the idea that there is this kind of, when we see an image of a body bag, I think of that smell. I think also of, the stench of the archive itself, the stench of these fake records, which are then also destroyed, and the stench of that destruction. So there is this accompanying olfactory shadow at all times, for sure. And I think that to truly then think of one's work within an expanded cinema tradition, you really try to push it, in all kinds of sensory directions. And yeah, I think that that was something that, and also, because these interviews are hours and hours and hours, the bits that stuck with me are bits which I felt were parallelly addressing the historical thing, the moment, but also saying something about filmmaking itself. For me, because I had recorded so many hours that I had to have some kind of logic to navigate this. So I thought something that also has a cinematic shadow. That was my first logic of sorting through the material. And then, of course, the internal, like I said, incisions within the black slug.
Yeah, can I? So first I want to tell that it was really enjoyable, the film. I actually have a quite straightforward question. I didn't know about much about you, about the film, of course. I read some lines before coming here, and what I was expecting was like just a sort of denunciation about the social events that happened in India during those times. And then I understood that that was just the means to send some other message through these events. Actually, I would like to know, for you, what was the real message behind all of this? Because for me, like, I picked up many messages, but I want to understand from your point of view, what is the real message you want to send to your audience, if there is some message? And if yes, why? Why you wanted to tell us this story?
My only message to this film is, please take me seriously as a filmmaker. This
Okay,
is my
that's
only true, sincerest message.
Okay, great. Thanks.